I think like a lot of educators and even just humans, the first reaction is a little bit of fear. Where is this going? What does this mean? Not just for the field of education, but for society.
A lot of students were kind of in awe, like, wow, this can do everything for me.
Students, will they cheat with generative AI? Yes. Cheating has always been with us.
It actually generates the product for the kid, and therefore it doesn't teach the student how to think.
How do we get kids to keep asking questions and being curious? Does AI enhance that, or does it limit that?
To what extent does it assist the student or assist the writer?
It's both a dilemma and an opportunity. I think we have to be optimistic about what it can do.
The AI revolution is here, and schools must figure out how to adapt. Thanks for joining us for this 12 News panel. I'm Joe Dana, along with three experts in Arizona education. Gabriela Rosu, Dean of Instruction at Chandler Gilbert Community College, works with Intel and is on the forefront of AI education. Julia Meyerson of Vista College Prep runs several charter schools and is using AI already as a tutoring platform. And, you know, the question is, what should parents of elementary kids know about this brave new world? We'll talk to Julia about that. And Kyle Jensen is the ASU Director of Writing Programs, overseeing about 150 faculty and 23,000 students. But Gabriela, I want to start with you. We've heard that these new generative AI tools that went online earlier this year are compared to ChatGPT on steroids. How would you describe the capability we're seeing now?
Thank you so much. And what I would like to start first is, like, Chandler Gilbert and Maricopa, we did collaborate with Intel and we launched the first AI program in the country, associate degree. But those tools, yes, they are more like the internet. It's going to be bigger. They are the ChatGPT on asteroids, but it's also the knowledge and how the faculty are going to leverage their learning. As educators, we're not just educating students, but how we educate ourselves so we can have the knowledge about the tools, the AI tools, how we're going to use them in a classroom, and how we're going to develop guidelines and policies around those tools and how we're going to use it.
And Julia, for parents of elementary age kids, how is AI already changing classrooms?
Thanks for the opportunity to be here today. I think that there is so much opportunity as we think about specifically the personalization of learning and how we as teachers and educators can better deliver on our instructional practices, on the curriculum that we are putting in front of our kids. For example, we're exploring right now a program called Amira, where one of the opportunities, I think, with this program is the idea of, if we have a class where we're doing some high dosage tutoring, for example, a teacher is working one-on-one with a group of 3 to 4 students. There's another group of students using a program like this. For example, it's an avatar. The student is actually reading into the computer. The avatar is actually pausing the student, coaching them on their reading. And so we're getting just an extra kind of bang for our buck as we think about how that student is getting the additional supports needed with their reading. And then from the teacher's perspective, how can that teacher actually better take a data sample and better deliver a personalized set of instruction for a particular student?
Kyle, writing is a fundamental aspect of school, and it's a process, and it's supposed to be painful and hard, and it's part of, you know, ferreting out information and sources, and this changes things. I mean, you can just literally ask questions and different engines will spit out huge summaries. How are these large language models impacting the writing process?
Well, I think it depends on what kind of tool we're talking about.
Okay.
There are certainly tools that create large content generation. That's the one that we're all familiar with, ChatGPT, and it's the gold standard of large language modeling. It does things that I think surprise even people who are really familiar with generative AI and what its capacities are. But there are other kinds of large language models and applications built on them that actually walk alongside students as they're engaging in the writing process. It's probably not quite as painful as you imagine it in college, but we've been doing some research in ASU writing programs to try and learn how these particular kinds of applications work. So one of the things that we've discovered in our initial pilot studies is that ChatGPT works really well for an aspect of the writing process that we call invention. So if a student, say, if I'm asking a student, I'd like you to write a paper on a particular topic, and they're not particularly familiar with that kind of topic, they can ask ChatGPT to generate an essay to that extent and help them take that first step of conceptualizing what an essay like that might look like. But then what our students do is something actually pretty interesting. We integrate other kinds of tools like WordTune, which is developed by a company called AI21 Labs. And instead of just whole content generation, the student actually writes something. They populate the search bar and they hit enter, and WordTune does something really fascinating. They provide 10 to 15 different options about how a word, a sentence, or even a paragraph could have been written. And all of a sudden, that puts the student in a really interesting space of having to make decisions. In our research, what we found is that students do one of three really interesting things. Sometimes they'll type something into the search bar, they'll get returns on it, and they'll say, wow, what the generative AI produced for me is better, or is better formulated than the thing that I thought I wanted to say. I was trying to say it, but that's exactly how I wanted to say it. And so they'll import that into their essay. The other thing that they'll say is if they'll populate it, they'll hit enter, they'll see all of the different kinds of options, and then they'll look at them, they'll read through them and say, ooh, I don't see any options that are particularly good for the kind of essay that I want to write. And that will help them feel more confident about what they've written before. And then the most interesting thing that happens is they'll type in something, they'll see that 10 different options, and maybe there will be a part of option 1 and a part of option 3 and a part of option 5, and then they'll integrate that within the sentence that they originally wrote or the paragraph that they originally wrote, and all of a sudden it's an amalgam of different kinds of sentences and different kinds of approaches. Now the generative AI is smart enough to kind of read in context and make further suggestions based on those revisions, which I think is a really wonderful thing for students when they're sitting in the middle of their dorm room, it's late at night, they have to get a paper done, and they need real-time feedback, but their TA or their professor is not available to do that. And so it becomes a kind of a dialogue that helps facilitate that process so that they actually can take the next steps, imagine different kinds of possibilities, and improve their writing overall.
Interesting. We heard a parent in that opening clip say, I'm worried about whether my kids will still be curious, and learn such that important virtue in education.
I think it's like piggyback on that is more like a treasure box. So for kids, it's very interesting and discovering that I can do this, like the gaming world. I can play, I can find, it's like a mining game. I can find information on, if I write a paper, everybody goes around the paper, and how I'm going to find that. So for me, looking at the kids and having an 11-year-old and looking at the college kids, they're all college kids, it's more the intrigue, how I'm going to find that. For the parents, the unknown is scary because I don't know if my kid is going to learn in school or they're going to rely on a tool that's going to tell them the answers, which the AI so far, even ChatGPT, doesn't give you the answers. It makes you go and dig more and say, I'm going to write this. Yeah, somebody who wants to write an email is going to be pretty easy. We tested that. You can spit an email. But for the kids, the parents should not be worried about. I will create classes that will educate the parents alongside the kids, like especially like middle school, so they can learn about the tools.
I was just going to say that I think it's the curiosity and the prompting of what would go into a tool like a ChatGPT of, if somebody's writing a newsletter, ChatGPT can spit that out. That person still needs the foundational knowledge and that critical thinking to reread it, edit it, make sure that it's fitting exactly what they want. And so I think for us as schools, we still have that deep responsibility of ensuring that all of that foundational knowledge is present, and also how to leverage this tool, this incredible tool, as you were just saying, that I think there's just incredible opportunity there.
When I talk with people who ask very similar kinds of questions, they say, are you worried about ChatGPT? And I've had actually more conversations about ChatGPT than just about anything lately. Yeah. One of the things that I tell them is we need to develop a certain kind of AI literacy. It's not just a matter of learning how to use the tools, but we also need to be really proactive in learning how they work so that we can have productive conversations about them, because I think a lot of the fears that we have about them are associated with the kind of black box quality of them. We really don't know how they're doing what they're doing, but all of those things can be solved through curiosity.
I do want to get your responses to a comment from a prominent high school educator, Chad Gueston, of the Arizona Institute for Education and the Economy. He just recently finished running Phoenix Union High School District. He talks about teenagers and AI. Take a listen.
Things that we've seen in high schools today. One, I think that this generation of learner seems to be a little more inquisitive than the generations of teachers. So in some ways, kids get ahead of us when it comes to this technology because they're not afraid to try and search and seek, versus educators mire down in hours and hours of work every week. They don't have the time to really get into this tool. I would challenge educators to immerse themselves in AI. Learn how it can help you. My message to parents would be twofold. One, reach out to the school. Find out what policies and procedures they have in place, and even what trainings they have in place. You're going to start to see school systems here in Arizona and across the country providing parent AI trainings to help them be better equipped. And second, I would tell them, practice with the tool, play with it yourself, learn what it is. It feels so ambiguous today.
It does feel ambiguous. How important will it be for parents to get involved and understand?
I think hugely important, and I think just as important as our responsibility as schools. For example, we're actually going to be part of a national sort of consortium of other schools that are looking, and I think Chad's point is exactly right, where people don't have time actually during their day to really dig into the tool and understand it. So it's incumbent upon us to actually do some of that work, give the opportunity to our teachers and to our team. How can you use this tool to make your day more efficient? How can you use this to help you write that newsletter that would have taken you 30 minutes but maybe takes you 5 with like 3 extra minutes of the editing that you would do for it? How will it help you, and especially for parents, to know how can we better leverage that to continue that personalization of learning, especially coming out of the pandemic, closing those learning gaps still that we're all working to do. I see such opportunity and power in this, and it's our responsibility, I think, just as Chad said, to get ahead of this and to figure out how this can enhance our daily work and how we can leverage this on behalf of our students so that they are truly ready, especially for us as middle schoolers. They need to know this tool so that they are better equipped when they go to high school, college, and beyond.
You're all very bullish right now about all this. I'm going to be a little bit of a downer here, Gabriella. We heard a professor say, students will always find ways to cheat, and so you sort of have to keep up and find ways to, have academic integrity. What systems are in place?
So our program in Estrella Mountain, so Chandler Gilbert and Estrella Mountain, that we offer the AI program, we do teach the students the ethics for the classroom before they go and create the algorithms so they can create their projects. They cannot graduate without completing a real-life project, which is amazing. So
a student graduating has to actually complete an AI-specific project.
Yes, and some of the projects, when we look at it's very impressive. Some of our students that receive global and national recognition, a group of students from Chandler Gilbert, they created a program, an AI program that detects seizures in children. And that came, one of the students, their child was sick. So they tried to come up with, how can I do that? How can I help my kid? So it's not about, like you said, plagiarism and academic integrity, how we teach them that in a classroom, but what they can use outside the classroom, that's up to the individuals. So in Maricopa and Chandler Gilbert, we have those discussions from the past couple of years. How are we going to do policies in terms of making sure that academic integrity is followed, and that's very important. But also with the faculty, how you create those policies, but also implement them. Like you said, Turnitin is one of the tools that has integrated a AI button into it. However, when I tested that, and Turnitin it's amazing. But I'm going back to the same questions that I tell the faculty. How can you ensure that the student did not write that piece of paper? Because there's no evidence. I can accuse anybody and say, you did not write that, but I cannot pinpoint directly to a source and say, you did not write because of this, this, this. So it's important for parents, but educators to educate the ethics and develop the policies, and how we're gonna teach them. It's up to us.
Kyle, do professors have tools right now? And do they have the knowledge to communicate to students right now about the importance of not taking the shortcuts?
I think we're getting there. I mean, we have to remember that ChatGPT kind of launched in November, and a number of educators spent most of their spring and a lot of their summer trying to figure out what does the landscape look like for the coming school year. One of the approaches that I've taken, and I know that the university has taken as well, is to educate in the way that you're describing here, to make sure that students understand what the tool is, how the technology functions, and then to trust our teachers to utilize the techniques that they've found to be successful prior to the onset of generative AI and establish guardrails around how the technology can be used. When people ask me about this pretty consistently, what I say is that generative AI can help us do the thing that teachers know how to do really well, which is invest time and energy in the growth of their students. And in order to invest time and energy, something really happens, wonderful happens, you get to know them, you learn their voice, you learn their tendencies, you see their limits, and you recognize their possibilities, and then you lean into that and try to help them leverage the tool in order to realize their potential once you get to know them. So I think there's always going to be a concern. I mean, the bit is that's my colleague at ASU, I know him, he's a wonderful and smart gentleman, and I agree with him. There is always going to be cheating, but the response to cheating is not we need to police it. The response is we need to learn more about the technology, we need to educate our way around it, we need to trust our teachers to establish really nice boundaries that they feel comfortable with, teach the students how to source the content, for example, and then proceed apace, because the one thing that I think we're all certain of here is that this technology is going to evolve rapidly, and the kinds of conversations that we're having now are going to probably be outdated in about 2 to 3 months.
2 to 3 months.
Yes.
Probably so.
That's how
Probably 2 to
fast
3
this is
weeks.
all happening. I know one high school teacher she told NBC News, I'm going to start having more in-class writing essays or mini quizzes where in that moment the students need to produce summaries of what they're learning, etc. Could that be part of how classrooms and teachers adapt?
We have to adjust to, because we have the online learning. So with the phase of the internet, what the education system evolved to, we offer online classes, online programs, they're online institutions, and also you have in person. It's like I go the same. I trust the faculty, they're amazing. And how you give that student the same experience in an online environment, like creating avatars or what is the support, and to have the same experience in person. As an in-person, I'm gonna have that connection with the students. I know you, I know how you think by the end of the class or by the middle of the semester. And then online, I have to give the faculty the resources to say, how can you identify that? How can you connect with the students in an online?
There are any number of best practices associated with making personal contact, not just with students and reading their voice and giving them immediate feedback, but also having peer-to-peer feedback and having them engage with one another. So, for teachers who may not be familiar with that particular kind of practice, maybe generative AI encourages them to lean into those best practices more effectively. And I think they'll be delighted to find that a number of their colleagues are already implementing those kinds of writing instructional strategies in their classrooms.
Final thoughts, or maybe a final sort of prediction of how you see this evolving or impacting the classroom in the next 1 or 2 years, maybe something we haven't quite touched on yet.
I will say that it's like everything else. We have to embrace it and how we're going to use it to the humankind benefit. And we have to learn what the flaws are so we can address it. Like it's an algorithm. So how are we going to produce the algorithm to is a simple law of programming, garbage in, garbage out, or the better the algorithm it is, the better the outcome is going to be for the AI. So embracing it and learning, for me, I love to learn. And our faculty just to learn, and then you can address the flaws, or you can address you have to question everything. I love that. Faculty come with amazing questions, and I don't know, sometimes I said, oh, I didn't think of that. But embracing it and just learn more.
I think 2 things I'm thinking about. One is, just generally the equity and access to the technology and the student population that we serve in particular and across the state, across the country. How are we ensuring that our kids also are getting every opportunity to be exposed to this technology to set them up for greater future and life success? And then I think the second, in terms of where I really can see it changing right now, for example, at Vista, we spend a full day every 8 weeks or so. We call it a data day, and our teachers are there. They're poring over different data sets from the assessments that we've taken. And I think something that I'm really excited about is how we can condense that in a way that, again, reduces the burden of just the collection and the analysis, just the collection, but moves more so that the teacher is spending time in the analysis of the data so that they can show up even better for their scholars.
Make teachers' jobs easier. That would be fantastic.
Yes.
So I think one of the things that I would emphasize as we look to the future is to invest time in understanding how that technology actually works, to develop that core literacy, because the applications that are going to be coming on the horizon are built on that kind of core logic. They're just evolutions and amplifications of what already exists. And as for predictions, I mean, it's a bit of a fool's errand as it relates to AI. So I'll predict it this way: be prepared to be surprised by its capabilities, and be proactive in learning about how those capabilities can augment our workflow, augment the way we interact with one another, so that we can be informed, knowledgeable users.
Yeah. It was calculators. Everyone kind of worried how those would impact classrooms, right? Then the internet and Google, and now it's regenerative AI. I think this may be the most groundbreaking, but we'll see. All right. I still think the writing process should be painful. Gabriella, Julia, and Kyle, thank you so much again. I hope you will keep in touch with us, as we are truly in the beginning stages of this new chapter of the information age. And thanks, everyone, for joining us.